Alright, so articulation, the final one, is really just the movement of the structures. So when we talk about articulation as a whole body, we can talk about articulation of the fingers, articulation of the elbows, articulation of the neck, articulation of the knees. And that's just those movements of those structures for creating different gestures, or squatting or sitting, moving those structures together. When we talk about speech, sound, and articulation, we're talking about the movements of the tongue, the movements of the velum, the lips, and the jaw, and that coordination of that movement and the extent of that movement. So, again, phonology is in the storage areas of the central nervous system in the cerebrum. The motor speech is the transmission of the signals from the motor and sensory areas coordinating for speech production, and then articulation is very simply just the movement. So we're ignoring the transmission of signals, we're ignoring the storage. Those should be completely normal when we're talking about articulation. So speech sounds are the end production of the articulatory process, but articulation really occurs at the levels of the muscles of the organs of speech. So again, it's not associated with the function of the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system. We're really trying to isolate articulation by itself, and this will be much clearer as to why we're doing this when we talk about articulation disorders. So although we have the vocal tract that's capable of producing a wide array of sounds, like coughing or burping, the speech sounds are special because they're associated with communication. So articulation entails that articulatory skills are developmental, which means that children gradually acquire the ability to move the articulators in a precise and rapid manner. And this is just like children gaining the coordinated skills for sitting up, for crawling, and for eventually walking. They do the same thing for the development of the speech skills. And the development of the movements for articulation are associated with phonology as a child expands their phonological database or file system. They also expand or learn those articulatory movements. And those articulatory movements adjust and become refined as the child grows and gains that coordination of movements. Just like when a child goes to walk, they might stumble around, they're going to fall, they're going to bump their knees. And when they're going to learn to create new speech sounds, their mouth is going to stumble around. They might say the wrong sound. They might leave sounds out. But we expect that the child is going to have this growth of skills over time, and they're going to be more refined. So we don't expect a 2-year-old to have the same speech sound skills or articulation skills as someone who is 7 years old. And that's just because a child who is 6 months old does not walk like a child who is 3 years old, or even a child that's a month old. It's not realistic expectations. The child has to gain those articulatory skills. So to round it all out, we have 3 different areas of speech sound production. We have phonology, we have motor speech, we have articulation. All of them are characterized by movements of the speech structures or the speech organs, but we're really parsing it down to where the areas are involved. So if someone has a phonological disorder, typically they're going to have an intact motor speech programming system and an intact articulation system. If someone has a motor speech disorder, they're likely going to have an intact phonological system. And if someone has an articulation disorder, then they're likely going to have an intact phonological and motor speech system. But it's not to say that all 3 of these can't occur at the same time, which is why it can get muddy. But it'll make sense when we talk about the ages, because we're more likely to see someone with a phonological disorder in children. We're going to see motor speech disorders in children or in adults. But it's typically related to damage in the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system, whereas phonological disorders are more related to acquisition of language. And our articulation is going to be related to just the structures themselves. Are the structures, the tongue, the roof of the mouth, the velum, the lips, are all of those structures intact?